every single employee that walks into your office or that you see in a school, you have to work with them in your relationship from wanting to empower them, wanting to lift them, loving them, seeing them in the place that they're at right now. And that is the secret sauce. And I was stubborn as heck in learning that one. But that just is an example of the many lessons that you learn in leadership. And because I've allowed myself to make mistakes and grow, I do the same with the leaders that the school leaders that I'm leading. Nobody comes to this role perfect. We try to convince people we think would make good leaders to go into the role, and we have to empower them and support them and uplift them every step of the way if they're going to stay there, because this is really hard work, and it's especially hard work now in this age of perpetual outrage. People are
Yeah.
looking for things to be mad about, I feel, and it's like the face outrage
Yeah.
translated into everything that you try to do as leaders. And leaders are dealing with a very different society than when you and I started.
The word courage is often tossed around when it comes to leaders and boldness and these kind of things. And that can be a very difficult thing to demonstrate, to live out when you're a school leader, because it is just such a politically charged position where you are working very hard to appease all kinds of stakeholders. And boldness is somewhat rare in terms of and courageousness to be able to stand up for something when you know that you are going to be opposed very strongly. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it's rare. Donna Miller Fry is one that exemplifies that beyond any school educational leader that I know, so much so that it cost her job. And we'll share the link to the story. Some of you probably know the story where she just stood up for the rights of children to be safe and protected in their school. And so we get into some of the details of this story. It's a bit of an ongoing situation. At the same time, Donna has more than survived and recovered and is now serving in a small community in the Northwest Territories. Donna is somebody that I have known for a long time and is one of the very, very few school leaders at the superintendent level, particularly, who has served in multiple provinces. We had Chris Yushi from Richmond on, I think he's got 3 provinces under his belt, but I believe that Donna has up to 4 now, and so maybe there's more, I don't know. So her perspective on education across Canada, I think, is unique. So along with her courageousness and boldness, she has this very, very rich perspective on Canadian education, and a special shout out she gives to the province of Manitoba. So you can listen for that and why she thinks Manitoba perhaps has it figured out as much as anyone. But what a great conversation that Donna and I have. We always can just have great times connecting and talking about all kinds of really interesting things. And just fun fact, as we concluded our discussion a few days later, Donna invited me to co-present with her for the Northwest Teachers Territories Conference in February 2026. We'll see if we hope that comes to fruition, and I would love to be able to co-present with Donna. But what a great conversation. I think you'll be inspired by her commitment and desire to see and really do what's best for kids. And so enjoy my conversation today with Donna Miller Fry. So like one of the amazing privileges of me having my show is I can connect with all kinds of people that I've had connections with. And Donna, you and I have had connections. Tell me if you remember the first time that you and I connected. I have the story in my mind, but maybe you have a different story about how you and I connected.
Oh, that's tough. So I think we connected digitally long before we connected in person. So through all the and ignites and oh no, ignites were in person. So I knew you before then. I can remember a conference in Ontario, and it was at that big Niagara Falls,
Yeah.
and you were upstairs with Discovery Learning, and you had the orange pants on. And I can remember being what? I can remember being on the main floor of the venue and then seeing the orange pants walking around upstairs getting
Spotting me.
I
See?
thought, okay, I'm going to go introduce myself to this guy. So I do remember meeting you at that event. What was that, 2010? I don't, maybe
something like that. But so the story I'm thinking of is our sort of, and I don't know what the timeline of this, but the whole Commander
Oh,
Hadfield
that's
story.
right. I forgot about that. That was what, 2000.
Because that was a lot of you thing. It was a pretty cool thing, but I started something and you finished it amazingly.
Oh, that was really something. So we had been making these connections in social media with Commander Hatfield, and at the time, I was a high school principal in Red Rock, Ontario, Superior Greenstone District School Board. And I remember thinking, how could I show him this work that we had done as a collaborative? But we had put our students into that video that you had made for Commander with the Commander Hatfield music. And so I thought, how can we let him see that right from the space station? How could we let him see it? And I remember I was actually sitting in a hot tub on our deck of our house, looking up, and I saw the International Space Station go across in the night sky. And I thought, when is he usually on Twitter? When's he usually on Twitter? When he's on Twitter, we're going to text a link to that video. And he watched it and he responded. And then it blew up. We were on CBC radio with our students and got to blog about it. And I think that was probably my most popular blog post ever.
Yeah.
Really?
So again, for context, I was teaching an undergrad class and I was trying to make connections for all of my students. And I reached out to my network and I did this a number of times and said, hey, basically, can you be like provide a digital internship, being very loosely phrased? So that was the thing. So I had you found one, I think it was one of your teachers that you connected my student
Right.
with, and you facilitated that. And so they did some sort of back and forth like this. I would have them maybe do a lesson online or whatever, connect with the students via blogs and so forth. So that was the sort of start of it. And then as a culminating activity, we did this kind of lip sync to the song that was it Ed Page wrote. I remember one of the Bare Naked Ladies guys wrote this song about, and Commander Hatfield was on there. And so we did that. That was the video that we created. And then this is the one that you had shared with Commander Hadfield that actually saw it and gave a shout out to you.
It's funny how you have selective memories, right? I forgot about the digital practica for the Faculty of Education students. And I've worked in faculties of education since then, and I forgot you used to do that and how powerful that was for students in University of Regina, I think it was at the time, right? Being able to do a practicum digitally in a high school in Ontario, and how rich it was for our students, because
yeah, and the sort of legacy of that is there are still a few that I know of who have been now teachers for a decade or more and still have had some connections with those initial connections that I helped them make. So that's something I feel very proud of. And again, I think the whole concept of it is very powerful and just really clear evidence of, this actually is very, not just cool is there, but like really powerful and meaningful for people to get to know people in all kinds of different circles. Now, I want to talk a little bit about as we were talking pre-record here, your journey as a leader has taken you at least, and I know 3 different jurisdictions or 4. So you've got Ontario, you've got Manitoba, you've got the Yukon, you've got Northwest Territories. Did I miss anything?
I think you did. Can I just, I'll back up a little bit on.
I think now I'm thinking Maritimes. Is that part of it? Was this part of it?
I just want to
No.
be clear. I'm not job hopping. Lads, this is all very intentional. So I'll give you a little bit of background on that. So you and I have both been involved in the EdCan network, the Canadian Education Association. So I was on the advisory board for a really long time. And back when Stephen Hurley used to facilitate a lot of things, I'd go to these advisory board meetings and folks from Alberta would talk about education in Alberta. And then folks from BC would talk about education in BC. And then folks from Ontario would talk about education in Ontario. And we were talking beside each other. Nothing was landing because in Canada, for those outside of Canada, education is a provincial and territorial jurisdiction, and we all have different systems. And I was thinking at the time, can you imagine being the person who is being in a senior leadership position in many different jurisdictions with the intention of figuring out how the structure of the system impacts the student learning? And so it was an intentional, I thought, I don't know that anybody's done this, that anybody's really dug in structures of the system and how and seeing how that impacts schools. I thought that's going to be me. So we were rooted in Ontario. I spent 22 years in Ontario as a teacher, and my husband was tied to the provincial government. But 2015, 2016, around there, he retired, and so it freed us up to start trying that trek across Canada to try jobs in different areas. So prior to that, I was living in Thunder Bay, but I was able to get a position in technology with the Ontario government. So I was doing some leadership work in Ontario first. I had a pretty good sense of that one. My first one out of province was Newfoundland. Absolutely remarkable experience, and I was green as anything. I would do that so much differently now, but that's part of growing as a leader. But I met remarkable people in Newfoundland, and I was the assistant director of education for the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District. And it was Darren Pike, who was also at EdCan. You might remember Darren Pike. That was the connection that helped me get to Newfoundland and Labrador, and learned so much there. Then I was also on a board of directors for a school in Nova Scotia at the time. So I was trying to dig into Nova Scotia a little bit. Kathy Montroy, who had been the Chief Student Achievement Officer for Ontario, had since moved there as deputy minister. There were a few connections with Nova Scotia as well, and still with EdCans, coming to those advisory board meetings several times over the course of being in Newfoundland and Labrador. Still whet my appetite for what else was going on across Canada. I was really fortunate to land in Pine Creek School Division in Manitoba in 2019. Dean, I don't know. I know you're from Manitoba. I lived in Northwestern Ontario. I was a regional education person for Northwestern Ontario. Kenora butts right up against the Manitoba border. We used to do our Christmas shopping in Winnipeg. I should have known that Manitoba is a hotbed when it comes to education. I had no idea that they have got it happening there. Do you remember the Ken Spencer Awards, the Innovation Awards we were with?
Yes.
You were on a judge for that. As a judge?
Yeah. Yeah. I was a judge for
Yes.
that. Yeah.
In 2019, we awarded that to Seven Oaks School Division. Matt Henderson was the principal of the school that we gave that innovation award to. Brian O'Leary was the superintendent at the time.
Yeah.
You met
Yeah.
from Unplugged. Matt and I were Unplugged alumni together, and they were doing remarkable things in Seven Oaks. And I had the privilege of driving out to Winnipeg and presenting them with that Ken Spencer Award, not knowing that I was going to end up as a superintendent there. But just so you know, that work has impact. Brian O'Leary is now the Deputy Minister of Education, and Matt Henderson is the superintendent of the Winnipeg School Division, and still doing really amazing things. But I had the incredible privilege of being the CEO superintendent for Pine Creek School Division in Manitoba. But the way it works there, man, when you want to talk about systems and empowering and how to really dig into what happens at the level of the student desk from the perspective of a superintendent, Manitoba has it figured out. It's Manitoba Association of School Superintendents is a really powerful learning organization. I had the privilege of being the director of education for that organization, and access to the best educators in the world. We used to bring Simon Breakspear up all the time just for the superintendents. Literally once a month, superintendents would all come in for learning. There were 3 days in the summer where all the superintendents came in and brought in Stephen Katz for 3 days to really dig into our practice as superintendent. But I think as a senior leader, the support and the learning was like nowhere else. And the connections with people doing really incredible things was, I really miss that actually. There's nothing like it. That's a great model for any province who's thinking about how do you really empower leaders of education to make a difference. Talk to Manitoba Association of School Superintendents.
So let me ask you this one thing, and I don't know if this is related or not. So Manitoba is the only province that still allows for local taxation.
It is.
And has that ability. Do you think that is a factor? That is part of why the state. I'm just asking. I don't know if it is or not, but that's what I see Manitoba as being the only province that still has that.
So that's fascinating because it got faced. So when I was there, I had to justify everything I did. The big meeting in the high school gym where you're going to present the budget and how taxes are going to go up. It was a really unique experience as a leader, but really powerful because you had to justify every decision you made. When I left there, things changed a bit. They took that away and now they've given it back. And I have zero expertise now on what that situation is. I hear deep divides on who thinks it's a good system, who thinks it's not a good system. You don't want to comment on that now. It may have at the time. I think that having to justify every cent basically to the public was
Okay.
a really important exercise for any superintendent. There's not a dime to waste when it's the local farmers, the families, the parents, children in
Sure.
schools who
Sure.
are paying for the education through their taxes. So that could be. But I also just think it's the magic of the people there. And you and I both know early in the digital times, Darren Kirkpatrick was there
Sure.
as a leader. John Evans was there as a leader. Rob Fisher, all unplugged alumni as well,
Mm-hmm.
and doing some really
Mm-hmm.
nice
Mm-hmm.
digital learning. So they're not new to innovation and leading. But
Right.
I just also think they have really strong leaders who believe that building capacity and is the sauce, is exactly what you need to do. You can't go into these roles if you're not competent, confident, and understanding pedagogy. And so that was a priority to build that. I missed that. I just want to flag that because when I was doing this learning journey across Canada, that's the thing that stuck out most is they're the one
Okay.
place that really focuses. So then, unfortunately, though, the government at the time was planning to get rid of all of us. Bill 64 was coming in. They were going to go to the Nova Scotia model, where you don't necessarily have to be an educator to lead education. And so we got a little scared that all our jobs were gone and started looking for the next place to be. And I had the opportunity to visit Yukon through C21 CEOs and made some connections there. And they had an opening. And so my next jurisdiction was a superintendent in the Yukon, which is an entirely different system and evolved while I was there. And it was uh, very much led by the deputy ministers. For example, just before I arrived, they had the art like the snowmageddon. The Whitehorse doesn't actually get a lot of snow, but they had this snowmageddon, and no one knew how to close schools because they hadn't really had to do it before. And it turns out only the deputy minister has the power to close this. So it cements the idea that the political aspect of it, the politically elected leaders actually have a lot of jurisdiction over the schools in the Yukon. There was in the Education Act provisions to create school boards, but very few had been created. There was the French School Board. But since then, and I was there when this happened, the First Nations School Board was created and now has jurisdiction over maybe around, I think originally 8, but now perhaps 10, maybe 13 schools. I haven't kept up. Add schools every year through the referendum process. But so there is a large First Nations school board in the Yukon now. And it's fabulous to watch the gains that they're making with the students up there. And then now Northwest Territories.
And all of those things, as you mentioned, the only one that I don't know that I was fully aware of was your little stint in Nova Scotia, but I knew about Newfoundland and the other spots. But I didn't know your intention around these things were to get this holistic view. I pride myself a little bit in having greater knowledge than the average person because of my journeys across, but I've never worked as deeply as you have in any of these systems. I love the call out from the Manitoba structure because I'm fascinated with things like org structures and like why do these things work. When you speak about the people of Manitoba, yeah, totally. Like I'm working with Matt again and and now Tony Kreml in Seven Oaks and many of the other folks around there. Ted Franson, who's retired but still very active in Manitoba, and then the Andy McKeels and the Darrens and all kinds of just really amazing people. There's a little bit of a similar vibe in Saskatchewan. Interestingly enough, I think I'm less connected in Saskatchewan than I probably in Manitoba. And here, this is always a fun fact. So 2010, and I don't want this to be about me, but this is more about Manitoba. 2010, I received the ISTE Outstanding Leader Award. The reason I received that award was because Andy McKeel nominated me as part of Manitoba's affiliation with ISTE. It had nothing to do with Saskatchewan. He just said, "I'd like to nominate you." I said, "Yeah, but I don't even, I'm a consultant in Saskatchewan. It doesn't matter. I still want to do it." That's the kind of people that they are. Yeah, that's very interesting. Before we go on to that, I'm just curious about, okay, so you've identified Manitoba as having, and again, there's a little nebulous there. Like we don't quite know why. Like we're speculating as to why you think there's some really awesome things happening there. But when you look at sort of those other jurisdictions, any kind of just idea around how those other provinces and territories are structured that either are, you think, yeah, that's a useful structure, or I feel like this is something that bogs them down in terms of providing that first-class education that we all want for kids?
Yeah, really interesting question because my focus was how it does impact right at the level of the student desk. Newfoundland and Labrador was absolutely fascinating to me because it's quite a closed system. And so quite often people will go through the school system, go to MUN, and then become teachers and then go back into the same school system. So there's not a lot of outside people coming in, but at the same time, a real desire to pull in expertise and a real connection with the other Atlantic provinces. So lots of learning and an incredible focus on counseling. They have the best compared to Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know that there's any jurisdiction in Canada that provides the level of support for children with high qualifications required in schools, and counseling opportunities for students was never a problem there. And I love to dig
Mm.
into why they've been able to have such a strong focus and why they've been able to produce so many people with high qualification, because they're doing a great job of supporting their students in that way. At least when I was there, and then you go across Canada and you end up in places where it's actually really hard to find counseling services for children because they've been directed to health and health has been cut and there's not enough people. And so I would say that the structure, at least whatever it is about the structure in Newfoundland and Labrador, they've got that piece figured out really well. Manitoba's figured out the importance of capacity building with their leaders in particular really well. I would say the Yukon now with the First Nations School Board has really taken control of the idea that each and every child matters and their reading matters. If you go on their website now, they have children holding up how many words they know now compared to how many words they knew a year ago and how their reading is improving. And they're really focusing on that every single child needs to learn. And they've taken that away from the more political government structure of what the schools used to be and can pivot, I think, more quickly. Doesn't have to be a political decision. It can be a decision based on what they're seeing in terms of the learning needs of their children. Northwest Territories, I'm just getting to know. I really like this. We have, so for example, in our small Decho Divisional Education Council here, we have 8 small communities, and each community has what we call a district education authority, a DEA. And so they elect people in the community. They have representatives from chief and council. They have representatives from the communities council if they happen to have a village council and mayor and so on. They have representatives that are voted in by the public, and they have legislated authority over the schools in the community and work very closely with the principal to make sure that local ideas are embedded in what happens in the school. And that's a really powerful structure. Each one of those communities chooses one trustee to represent them on what we call the DDEC, the Division Education
Mhm.
Council, and they come together and run the entire region. But it embeds in the curriculum, it embeds in the schools, the cultural pieces that are often missing elsewhere. What I find here is that we're not so much trying to figure out how to embed culture in the school. The culture is in the school and it's palpable. And my second day here, I watched the kindergarten children in the school right behind me. You can kindergarten children, you have grandchildren. I have a grandchild in kindergarten as well. Trying to keep kindergarten children in a straight line in the snow. And I watched them bounce across from the school, and they had several support assistants with them, a teacher with them, culture workers with them, but they were bouncing out to the wall tent to have a lesson around the fire outside. And it's just part of what they do every day. It's just already here. Never quite
Right.
seeing culture as part of what we do in school in the same way, in the powerful way that they have here. And I think part of it is because the legislated ability of local people to actually have power in the schools, instead of just a voice, they actually have power in seeing what happens in the schools. So it's very different and is so far highly successful.
It's obvious that there's two components. There's the structure, but then there's also the people. And the greatest structures in the world aren't going to function if you don't have the right people in place. And then I think where the frustration comes is when you have really good people, but they're impeded by a poor structure that doesn't enable them to and so again, everybody's trying to find that. But in the end, I think that my observations are this really that the people behind it are more important than the structures. They can overcome slightly bad structures. But again, and I think we're blessed in Canada, generally speaking, with amazing people. I'm still waiting really to meet somebody. I know they exist, but I'm still waiting to meet something in a really high senior leader says this is a crappy person. I'm sure they exist. I know that, and maybe I've been just blessed, but it just seems to me that we have so many really good people in these in positions across Canada for sure.
And it's one of the
So
reasons I love listening to this podcast because you get reintroduced to people that you knew in other roles. Evelyn was on
right,
your podcast, and I knew her from way back in Ontario, and to see where she's leading now, strongly
yeah,
she's leading. Mike Borgfjord from Manitoba, who's Andy McKill's superintendent. I spent lots of time with them when I was there. They were doing amazing things, and then to hear now where he is in Alberta, it's been great.
yeah,
These great people that we connect with, and then we can see
yes.
tremendous work they're doing as they move into other jurisdictions. Yeah.
And it reminds you that we're actually a pretty tight, small community when it comes to it, right? There's a lot of that. So that's awesome. And again, this is, I think, a fascinating question to think of, and one that I don't know if you think about this, and you will think about this, but when they put together the highlight reel for Donna Miller Fry at the major ceremony one day, whatever, in that highlight reel, what is like the one thing that you hope as part of that highlight reel of your career in education?
Oh my gosh, what a question. And maybe I do look at it a little bit differently because for me, it has been all about personal growth. It hasn't been about highlights along the way.
Mhm.
It's been about what's shifted practice and what's changed along the way. And as you mentioned, the people that are there. So when I think about Newfoundland and the absolutely remarkable people that were on their own learning journeys and who are now in leadership positions, but took me aside and said, this isn't going to work. And you cut your teeth on those experiences as you grow and you learn. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm still going. The lessons learned in when Newfoundland, hard lessons, because that I was really new as a leader at that level. Then Manitoba and all of the capacity building that was there, and then going into the Yukon and running into some needs for real courage and ethical decision making up there made me who I am right now. And there's not one experience that's more important than the other. It's the complexity of all of that learning. And one of the things that I often say to my staff here, way back when I was doing the provincial lead for leading technology and learning and teaching, technology enabled learning and teaching, it was a mouthful back then, it still is, with the Ontario government. That's when Michael Fullan wrote that book, Six Secrets for Change for Leaders. And we were all supposed to read it. And the first secret was love your employees. And I balked at that. I'm like, there's people here who don't do that. I was one of those, everybody should be working harder than they are. It was one of those people. And I realize now at this point in my career that love your employees is the number one most important thing. Every single employee that walks into your office or that you see in a school, you have to work with them in your relationship from wanting to empower them, wanting to lift them, loving them, seeing them in the place that they're at right now. And that is the secret sauce. And I was stubborn as heck in learning that one. But that just is an example of the many lessons that you learn in leadership. And because I've allowed myself to make mistakes and grow, I do the same with the leaders that the school leaders that I'm leading. Nobody comes to this role perfect. We try to convince people we think would make good leaders to go into the role, and we have to empower them and support them and uplift them every step of the way if they're going to stay there, because this is really hard work, and it's especially hard work now in this age of perpetual outrage. People are
Yeah,
looking for things to be mad about, I feel, it's like the face outrage
yeah,
translated into everything that you try to do as leaders. And leaders are dealing with a very different society than when you and I started. And it's really hard. And I
absolutely.
go back to Andy Hargraves. I think he wrote a book back in about 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, called Uplifting Leadership. And it's a powerful reminder that's your work. Empower the leaders that are under you and that you're supervising, and empower every one of your employees. And so I would say that the highlight reel that you asked for was just a whole bunch of being
Yeah,
open to learning. My favorite question on an interview. So if you're applying to come up here and work with us, keep this in mind. What have you changed your mind about recently? Tells
mm,
me that you're learning and you're figuring
that's
out.
right.
And I love that question. And I learned so much from those interviews when people start to talk about what they thought and now what they think and how that's changed their thinking. And when you've got somebody who can do that, who can walk this walk with an open mind and learn from every experience they have, get better as a result of, that's who I want to be empowering in my schools.
Oh, I love that so much. And you are the second person on this podcast to talk about love. The other one was Matt Henderson, too, talking about loving other people, which is, again, it's like I get where your sort of first initial reaction comes from. That's a weird thing. But in the end, yeah, like that idea of empowering people, and that's the basis of a culture that's going to thrive when you have people that are, I start with the premise of, I want you to be successful. I'm here to help you be successful. I love what you're doing. We're going to figure this out together. And I want to transition that concept into the next question about challenges, because you can paint a picture of, oh, I love everybody and I want that to be successful. And that still can be true. And at the same time, as a leadership, there's challenges along the way, things that you have to do. And I know you have a rather public, but I know that's been a big, I don't know if we're going to call that a highlight reel in the sense of this is amazingly positive, although that's what we hope it to be in the end. But just tell me a little bit about that leadership challenge specifically and how that's really, how you've grown through that and worked through that.
Thanks. Thanks for that question, because it's a difficult topic to talk about, but I think it's a really important one. So I'll just go back to Canadian Education Association. Again, that was a really strong beginning for me. And Ron Canuel at the time was the executive director. And Ron was on a cross Canada tour, I think, talking about courage, having courage. If you're going to lead, you have to have courage. And he talked about his own courage in the school division. And so as I've been working as a leader across Canada, I find myself calling Ron quite a bit and just talking about this idea of courage. So in the Yukon, and I want to start by saying that in the Yukon, I supervised 12 schools and I had 11 remarkable schools. I had one school that had trauma-informed practice nailed so well that I would invite anyone in a school across Canada to come and see how they were doing it. And I want to begin with that because when I start to talk about my leadership challenge in the Yukon, I don't want anyone to think that it's a perpetual that it's in all the schools in the Yukon. There are remarkable schools. First Nation School Board is doing remarkable work. But when I was in the Yukon, and I'll just summarize really quickly what we found without going into too many details. I've published a lot of information on this already. But what we found in a school was that restraints and ways of, how can I say, restricting children inappropriately were being used in a school. And we needed to have a significant culture shift that saw children as having challenges and reacting to those challenges instead of seeing children as being bad children who needed to be punished. And that was a really big piece of work. And as we started to dig into how we were going to do that culture shift, we did find out that for a number of years, restraints, seclusion, isolation of children, basically abuse of children, was being used as a tool inappropriately. And so I did call Ron. One of the first people I called to say, I've discovered this situation and how am I going to move forward with this? Because once we open this can of worms, it's going to be really difficult to realize that children have rights. They have rights to an education. They have a right to be safe in schools. And we talked a lot about courage and moral dilemmas and ethical practice and ethical leadership. And as I've often said to Ron, the other side of courage is the hard part, right? Like, where is this going to go if we open this can of worms? And he said, where is it going to go if you don't? You're going to have to live with this. So you need to make courageous decisions and do what you need to do, because as much as we talk about uplifting the people that work for us, our primary obligation, our primary purpose is for the children, and uplifting and upholding the rights of children in our schools to an education that's suitable for them and one that they deserve and without harm. And I disclosed that this was happening to the RCMP. It resulted in both an internal investigation in Yukon Education, and it resulted in an RCMP investigation. As call to action number 6 in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code that allows parents and teachers to harm children still. That has not happened. We're working with Stan Kuchar on that in the Senate, trying to pass a bill that would repeal that section of the criminal code. That's a bit of a side project. But after 2 years of interviewing over 200 people, the RCMP decided not to lay any charges in this case. However, on behalf of the victims, we do have a class action lawsuit against the government of Yukon for compensation for the victims of abuse at the school. And that's progressing. I've been posting some updates on that on my blog, and the subpoenas for that court case went out before Christmas. We will be starting in court in the Yukon on August 11th of this year. And with hope in the end, the several hundred victims that are part of the class action lawsuit will get the compensation they deserve for what they endured in a school system that was not respectful of their intergenerational trauma, was not respectful of their socioeconomic class, and the inability of the families to stand up for the kids. So very difficult and challenging couple of years. I did lose my job as a result of bringing this to the attention of the government. And the current CBC has done a really nice documentary, 40-minute documentary on this from the perspective of the families and the victims. It's really worth listening to. But from the perspective of a leader, having the courage to make those ethical decisions is, you've got to dig really deep for that, because coming out the other side can be incredibly challenging. When I was invited to become the superintendent of DDC here in the Northwest Territories, the first thing everyone did was Google me, of course. And for some people, this is exactly the kind of leader they were looking for. They wanted someone who would stand up for the rights of children in their community. And for others, the immediate was, she got fired. We don't want her. That's what you live with. You live with that. You got fired from your job. And so it's taken some time to work through that with the people here to help them understand that standing up for children isn't always what is wanted and necessarily the path that's going to lead to good things. And still, you have to come out the other side and know that you did the right thing.
So, Donna, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I know that's, when you think about the highlight, it's not really a highlight in terms of, it's not a positive thing, and yet at the same time, it is part of the journey. And I just don't know that every leader is willing to do what you did, to something that really, it cost you a job, a little bit maybe for some, your reputation, although I would argue that it only enhanced your reputation and solidified you. And I think you'd mentioned before we talked about the fact that Ron Knull had said to you, is what's the cost if you don't stand up and speak, right? Like, you have to live with the fact that you didn't say anything. And again, I think this is such a powerful lesson for others. And again, I'll transition to my next question is, you are obviously now somebody who's a seasoned, especially a seasoned female leader in education. And I wonder, whether it's female or male, doesn't matter, but I wonder if you're thinking about those young people who are going to be filling your shoes one of these days. What kind of advice would you give to them? The courage part is obviously you lived that out, you modeled that, but is there anything else that you might say to them as they think about, like, how do I become somebody like a Donna Miller Fry or others that they see as people they want to emulate? What's the advice you give them?
First of all, I think a lot about that here, because the thing that I don't have in my repertoire is local knowledge. And I'm absolutely absent on that. And so I'm always just trying to listen and understand the desires and wishes and the visions of the people who are here. And so I try very hard, and we're about to embark on a policy here in the government of the Northwest Territories around empowering Indigenous people to take leadership roles. And so I try to find local people from the communities. First of all, I think a lot about the background of where they are. But I think overall, in terms of becoming a leader, I think teaching as long as you can, become a really good teacher. We rush people now. I see people 4 or 5 years in a classroom, and suddenly they're in leadership and they're supposed to have some understanding of what needs to happen in the classroom. I would really say, don't rush it. And when you're in that teaching position, do your best to figure out all the different types of pedagogies and how to meet the needs of individual learners, and to really up your game so you are a confident teacher before going into that leadership role. So you feel very confident going into classrooms and being able to work with teachers in a non-judgmental way to improve their practice, because everything in the system revolves around what happened in that classroom. The quality of classroom instruction is what determines whether or not it's a good system. And so if you're going to lead that, you need to get really good at classroom instruction and confident that what you're saying to teachers, or learning beside teachers and feeling confident as a
Yeah.
leader that will learn. That to me is the most important piece.
Good. And again, I always ask people that question. I've never had anybody respond quite that way, so that's an awesome addition. So you've already done a wonderful job of, I don't want to say name dropping, but you've identified a lot of people in your career who have helped you along the way, and you've called them out. But I'm going to give you one more opportunity, and so maybe it's somebody you've already mentioned, but maybe somebody different that you haven't talked about that you're really grateful for in your education journey.
So I think that's a crazy hard question for any leader who's had that open mind of just listening to everybody all the time. And I'll give an example. I was sitting at Chief and Council last week, and a council member from the Cliticu First Nation stood up and said, "I'd like to address you. And I would like to say to you, if you can't figure out all the drama among the adults, you're never going to get to working with the children, which is what we really need you to do." And so you're just like, "Thank you very much, Fred." I know now that they know that the process I'm going to take is aligned with their process. And then the next day I was sitting at a lunch, and an elder sat down and asked me just to stay and gave me a story that he'd like me to reflect on before making any moves here. And so I'm so gifted with people who have take the time, and I try to listen really hard and learn from what they're saying. So to select one is almost against that leadership style of having to listen all the time, because I've been incredibly fortunate along my journey. But I'm going to just say, as a principal, I had a wonderful opportunity once to go to a conference, and the pre-conference speaker was Kathy Montoy, who was chief student. I've mentioned her before. And she started talking about what classrooms should look like. And I had never heard anyone speak like that before in my entire life. I sat there. I was one of the few people in the room because it was a pre-conference session. Might have been 10 of us in the room. And she spoke for 3 hours. And it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. She talked in a way that really focused on each and every child. She said, freeze the room, walk into a classroom, freeze the room. Every single child should be doing what's next on their own personal learning journey to move forward. And if that's not happening, you have to figure out how to get that to happen, because it's the duty of the teacher to make sure every single child is on their learning journey, not alone. You don't have to do it alone. You can bring in all kinds of expertise and help, but it is what you do as a teacher is make sure every child is moving forward in their learning. And that was the foundation, I think, for everything I've done since.
Wow, that's a very good way of answering that question. I mean, again, nobody likes that question because, again, it's not one person, never one person. But it is sometimes nice to identify a moment like that, which I think is, many people have those moments of somebody that just changed the way they approach things. And so awesome. All right. Just to wrap up, these are what I call my fun questions. I don't know. We'll see how fun they are. But so for professional and personal growth, what are you currently consuming?
Consuming books,
reading, listening, whatever.
Okay. What another person who shifted my thinking, and I've had lots of those, is Ira Sokol. I don't know if you're familiar with Ira Sokol.
Yeah, I know Ira. Yeah.
As a principal, and posted something about a math program and on Twitter, and he caught me and he said, "You don't seem like the kind of person who would be promoting that kind of instruction." And that was way back in 2007. And ever since then, I've loved his writing, his tool belt theory. I've loved everything about it. So he has a new book called Designed to Fail. And it's about the US education system, but it's quite applicable to here as well. So I've got that beside the bed. I also have Decolonizing Education by Marie Batiste. That was recommended to me by Dr. Shara Robinson, a wonderful educator I met in Newfoundland. And then Nexus, Yuval Noah Harari. Oh my.
I got that one on the go. That's a heavy one.
That's why the other two. So is Decolonizing Education. Very heavy. They're all heavy.
Yeah.
They're all heavy.
Yeah, you don't sit down and just rip through that. That's not a let's just rip through this. It's okay, I can read about a chapter, then I need a break.
I have them on audiobooks for these long drives. Honestly,
Yes.
I have to keep listening over and over. This section on stories, I'd never thought of stories that way. And then paper I'd never thought of paper. Honestly, he's just shifting my thinking so much right now. I absolutely love that.
Cool. But what about when you don't want to be learning. You just want to just veg, chill. Okay, I just need something mindless. What do you go for mindless entertainment?
Yeah, so, one of the things about being a superintendent is there way too much sitting, right? Hours and hours sitting, so I'm not a sitter. As soon as I'm out of the office, I'm a runner. Lots of miles, got marathon training going on, so most of what I'm learning is podcast in my ears. But over Christmas, just with family, because 'cause you're spending kind of time around a screen, we started watching Landman with Scott
Oh,
Thornton. Oh, it's worth the oil
okay.
and gas industry, and wow, it's really
Wow.
powerful. It's worth your time. But mostly, because my
Okay.
son is an elite cyclist, we watch a lot of cycling races. The
Okay.
Lifetime Grand Prix series. They're a ton of fun to watch, but, it's like watching Hockey Night in Canada, but from the cycling perspective.
Okay. Now, last question, which might even be hard for you too. So first of all, you're in Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories.
That's
That's
where
where
we
you
are.
are. But you also have a home. Is in Thunder Bay? I don't even know where your other home might
I know,
be.
who knows, right? We have 100 acres still in
Maybe.
Thunder Bay, but we sold the house, and then we have a place in Whitehorse. Whitehorse is home now for us.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about
Do that.
Whitehorse. What is the place? And first of all, Whitehorse is one of those places where if you're going to go there, you have an intention of why you're going there. It's not just, oh, let's just go to Whitehorse and see what happens. But for somebody that says, first of all, give me your best tourism pitch around come to Whitehorse and what should we do there when we're there?
Oh, the Whitehorse is the actual best kept secret in all of Canada because people think north of 60 it's cold. It's not really. It's cold for a few days, but they don't get much snow, and the climate is actually remarkably beautiful. And you're literally a 90-minute drive from Skagway. So you've got fresh seafood. You can drive to Skagway on a Saturday morning and have lunch on the dock. Mountains everywhere. We're just completely surrounded by mountains. Here's the best kept secret. 700 kilometers of mountain bike trails in the city limits maintained by the city. It is the biggest cycling community in Canada. People fat
Wow.
bikes this time of year all winter long with their skis on the back. They're cycling up to the ski, like to ski, and then cycling back home. I worked at Yukon University and I watched people drop off children at daycare on bicycles. They build seats on the back of the bicycles for the kids and then they let them off. It's definitely a huge cycling community, hiking community. It's one of the fastest growing cities in Canada right now because the retirees have figured out that this is the place to retire in Canada. It's just northern BC. All the BC fruit just comes up the Alaska Highway and it has the most incredible hot springs, Japanese style spa that you can imagine. So even in the winter, you can stay really warm.
Oh, wow. You did listen, when you decide to shut her down, you could just work for tourism.
Hey, there are photos
Whitehorse,
on the
you'd be
20 my photos on the 2023 brochure, my photo of Miles. I'm
okay.
already
So
there.
we're already working towards that. Donna, this has been amazing. I'm so glad you said yes, and I'm so glad to hear your story. This is just a great way to get to know you even more and dig deep into some of the nuances of what's already been an amazing career. And I'm just excited to see what you're going to continue to do working in Northern Canada. So thank you so much for this
It's
time.
been a pleasure to reconnect. Thanks, Dean.